Okay, so I've got our basic coat done. So now we're going to clean it up or alter it to be exactly what we want. I personally want my character to wear a boob tube on her top and I want it to show underneath the jacket. So I'm going to need to take some material out of the back so it sits like that on the doll. Now I'm testing it via pinning the area, then popping it back up, checking if that looks how I want it before I decide to make any permanent changes in case they turn out to be wrong or it just doesn't sit right. So as you can see there, I've put pins along. Now you can either sew from the pins or you can use something called a fabric marker. These are markers that leave a mark on your fabric until you wash it. Some of them are air dry but still suggest washing them. Now make sure you do test this on some scrap fabric you have, as it's kind of hard to see in the camera, but the pink one I used didn't actually wash out. And there are versions for darker fabrics, but they're not as good. So as you can see, I'm now sewing along the back to take it in now that I've decided I like the look of it and I want that to now be permanent. And then I'll cut off the excess. You don't need to, but I found it was sticking out from underneath her butt. So I wanted to do that to make it look more professional. Now we're going to move on to the hem, which is the edges. You can leave the edges if you prefer, but I'm folding them in to make it look a bit more professional. As you can see, I've taken a whole bunch of pins along there to hold it in place because keeping a hem even is very important. Now, if you're going to use this on a sewing machine, I highly suggest you do a quick tacking sew to put any fabric in place. As you can see, there's a pin right underneath my needle. That will either push the pin into my sewing machine, shatter the pin head, or break my needle. So only use a sewing machine if you have gotten rid of anything that could get in the way. It is still suggested you hand sew stuff, but if you want to try sewing, it is faster once you get the hang of it. Keep trying the doll on keep trying the jacket on the doll as you go so that you can confirm that your changes still look good as you go. Now I've decided I'm going to steal some Velcro from another piece of doll clothing I have because the Velcro is quite skinny. As you can see, I'm just unpicking it there with a seam ripper and I'm deciding exactly how much of the Velcro I want to be on the jacket, hence deciding how much of the jacket will actually overlap versus how much of it will show the boob tube. When you're working with Velcro, I do suggest you cut off all the extra little threads because those will get caught all up in the hook part of the Velcro and they're just a bit of a nightmare, so best to cut them off beforehand. Now, as you can see, I'm just hand stitching on the Velcro. Now, this particular Velcro was actually quite delicate. It kept breaking if I was sewing too close to the previous stitch I did, so I've had to use a bit of a chunky stitch to make sure it doesn't break. Now, thanks to my fabric choice, because it is quite dark and there's a lot of black texture in there, you can't really see the stitches anyway. Hence why I also like to pick a thread that melds with the fabric in case you can't avoid a chunky stitch. Now, as you can see, I'm actually adding a collar to try and give it that proper jacket look, but since it's a doll scale, we can't really sew it completely the same as a human jacket because the small scale doesn't have the same kind of gravity. It doesn't sit the same. So we need to actually fake a lot of those details that gravity would normally do for us. I'm also sewing on a little triangle for the fold out of the jacket. And I'm also quickly fixing up some of the top of the Velcro that was coming out while I'm there. Again, keep trying it on your doll. Make sure it looks right. I found that my collar looked a little too chunky at the back, so I snipped off like a millimeter of it there. And essentially you add the details that you want. If you have a fabric that has both sides looking good, then it doesn't really matter which side you sew a particular way, but as my fabric has a good side and a bad side, I had to sew everything so that the good side would be showing outwards. Again, trying everything on, making sure the scale looks right. I wanted to go for a very exaggerated collar because I was thinking of her being like a Vogue executive. Now here I'm pressing the seams with heat / an iron. So if you're going to do this, first be careful with heat. Second, try it on a test piece of fabric, because first you're going to want to see whether this fabric will melt or burn, and then you've got to confirm it will actually take the seam. And as you saw there, it did have a bend where I wanted it, so it will work. Now, if you're using a synthetic fabric like I am, it doesn't actually iron properly per se, so you've actually got to heat it up and then push on it with something cold until it cools down. So it's not necessarily the heat that does the setting, it's more the process of it cooling down in position. You can completely skip this step, or you can actually use water and then leaving it to dry in position with a weight on it overnight, or more until it's dry, and you can get the same result. I'm just extremely lazy and wanted to do it fast. Now, as you can see, I'm actually trying to press some of the back of the jacket to make it sit a bit smoother on her butt. And look at that, well, doll is all done, and this is exactly how I want it to look. Everything else I need to do is with the doll's other pieces of clothes, so in regards to the jacket, this is completely done.